They say everything's bigger in Texas, and no dive coaster on planet Earth will be taller, longer, or faster than Six Flags Over Texas's new Tormenta Rampaging Run. This is the world's first Giga dive coaster, Giga referring to a roller coaster that stands between 300 and 399 feet. And up until this point, the tallest dive coaster we'd ever seen was 223 feet tall. The scale of this new for 2026 attraction is staggering. 309 feet tall. 285 foot drop, and a maximum speed of 87 miles per hour. It's the third tallest ride at Six Flags Over Texas, following Texas Skyscreamer and Superman Tower of Power, giving the park now 4 attractions at 300 feet or above. It's a ride they've been teasing for months. Track is already on site. We have support columns that have gone vertical. This ride is going up, and when it's complete, it will dramatically change the Six Flags Over Texas skyline forever. You'll be able to see this ride from miles away as you're passing by the park, and it'll be the first coaster you see as you pull up, as it is replacing the old Lava Bora Intamin bobsled coaster. With the ride being the new anchor of the Spain section of the park, it seems like they're really making an effort to theme out and build a story around this section. They claim they're building a brand new Spanish village called Rancho de la Tormenta, and that's where Tormenta Rampaging Run will be located. There will also be a new restaurant, Cocina Abuela, which I can't wait for because Six Flags has been upping their food game, and they say it's going to have live tortilla making, Spanish rice, house-made guacamole, traditional items from Spain and Latin America, another much-needed fit to Six Flags Over Texas, which has always been a park that I felt like deserved better. With it being the original Six Flags park, opening back in 1961, there's such a rich history here, and I always felt like they were getting sidelined. The Dallas-Fort Worth metropolitan area is huge and is growing so fast. Even within the theme park industry, you can see that with the addition of the new Peppa Pig Park and Universal Kids Resort also on the way. They were in desperate need of just some basic renovations, a little bit of TLC, and from everything I've gathered, Tormenta is just one part of that. I love hearing about all the recent updates that are being made to this park, maybe in part due to the merger, maybe just a result of how they restructured some things. Regardless of why, it's probably going to feel like a breath of fresh air walking in 2026 versus my most recent visit in 2023. And while an exact dollar amount has not been released for the cost of this attraction, we can assume it's well over a $30 million investment, maybe even closer to 40, which might make it the largest investment they've ever made. The only one that's going to come close is Titan. That attraction sits 64 feet shorter than Tormenta, so if you felt like that ride was huge, it's about to look small compared to this thing. And with it being right next to the parking lot, you're going to be able to stand pretty much directly underneath the first drop, which I really think is going to help give this thing some perspective. I was recently at Canada's Wonderland riding what is currently the world's tallest dive coaster, Yukon Striker, and it's wildly impressive how big that attraction feels in that park. And so I'm trying to imagine that on an even larger scale. And in theory, should be a great ride. We've got a pretty interesting mix of elements here. A total of 5 inversions, including the world's tallest Immelman, the world's tallest vertical loop, and what I believe is the first cutback on a dive coaster. I think it might also take the record for most Immelmans on a single attraction with 3, which is a little crazy to me that just based off of the plot of land that they're working with, that's the element they kept on using. I hope it doesn't feel repetitive. I'll be watching to see how this thing traverses through its course, because as I've mentioned with other dive coasters that I've experienced, I think pacing here is key. How do you make the ride not feel like a one-trick pony? And that's why I tend to prefer the dive coasters that don't have a mid-course brake run, because then they just power through the layouts. Tormenta does pause halfway through. I actually saw a funny comment that made me laugh. They said, the 2 biggest coasters in the park, both will have rides that slam you to a stop on the mid-course. I'm like, wow, that's kind of ironic. But I'm excited to say that it looks like Tormenta will have one of the more interesting second halves on a dive coaster, which hopefully won't make it feel like it's just kind of fizzling out. That second drop alone is the size of like a normal roller coaster drop. An exact height of it has not been released, but just based off of the scale of everything else, I'd put it around 130 feet. And a ride like Baron doesn't even reach 100 feet, which is pretty comical to think about. And out of everything we learned about this new attraction, one of the most unexpected surprises came in the form of this near miss on that second drop. It is crazy how close you are going to get to that other section of track. That, I think, is going to catch everyone off guard. It's also worth noting that that mid-course passes directly overhead the park's train that circles the property. You're going to get some pretty up-close views from that attraction. It's going to be cool. I will mention though, this animation is a little deceiving in that you can see Conquistador, the park's swinging ship, in the background, but we recently found out that that attraction has closed for good. They will not be returning to the park next year, so this animation was clearly made before that change had been confirmed. Tormenta has a track length of about 4,200 feet, which makes it the longest dive coaster in the world, and that's with the 5 inversions as I mentioned, the same as Ratha-Rakshasa, but that attraction is on a smaller scale. The current longest, Yukon, has 1 less inversion as well as 500 less feet of track. So that gives me hope in that this ride experience will feel satisfactory. I am going to be watching this brake run though, because we might have a contender, ladies and gentlemen, for the world's longest brake run. As of right now, I think it's Leviathan at Canada's Wonderland, though Fury's got to be up there with it. This looks pretty lengthy, which I'm not going to lie. I don't know how necessary that is, because I imagine we're probably just looking at 3 trains of operation. If you see a ride like Valraven or again Yukon Striker, those brake runs aren't super long and they also run 3 trains. Which, by the way, we are looking at the same typical 8 across trains that you have with Yukon Striker or Valraven. 24 passengers per train, the same usual vest restraint that we've seen with all the more recent dive coasters. I saw some people saying they were surprised they didn't go with the 10-seater trains, and I really think it comes down to the width of the vests. They take up more space than those original over-the-shoulder restraints, and I don't foresee those coming back to the dive coaster. Now, I mentioned at the beginning that Tormenta is breaking 6 world records. One of the more interesting ones is they are claiming this is the tallest roller coaster in the world with a beyond vertical drop, which, from everything I've seen, is technically true, 95 degrees. All they would have had to do to make it the world's steepest dive coaster is go an additional 2 degrees, which there is part of me that's surprised they didn't do that. So as of right now, Ratha-Rakshasa is still the steepest dive coaster, but I think it's an okay trade-off because this is the only Giga that has a beyond vertical drop, and it's the only Giga that has inversions. That drop will start with that classic dive coaster hold over the top. You'll release, building up speed to 87 miles per hour, and I cannot wait to see what that feels like. And for those on the end seats, you might feel like you're not going to be able to clear this track on either side. I love this perfect symmetry here with this cutback perfectly framed over the bottom of the drop. How close those 3 layers of track are in a line. It looks like a piece of rope threading through a knot. It's very satisfying. And finally, the other big record that I found particularly interesting is they're saying this is the world's tallest Immelmann, which from everything I've been able to find, I believe the current tallest is on Yukon Striker, though an exact height of it has not been released. But we know this new Immelmann will be the tallest inversion in America, beating out Steel Curtain, which flips riders upside down 197 feet in the air. Assuming Qiddiya opens before Tormenta, which it's looking like it will, then this attraction will not be able to take the record as world's tallest inversion, as Spitfire has a 240-foot tall top hat. I'm very intrigued in seeing how this Immelmann feels. It looks like you might get a bit of hang time out there before you twist out at the top. To put this in perspective, that Immelmann is a hyper. Like, it's bigger than 95% of most roller coasters, including many of your favorites, like Zadra, Iron Gwazi, Steel Vengeance. It's twice the height of Voltron. I mean, it's completely ridiculous. Now, all that being said, was this the best fit for Six Flags Over Texas? While it probably wouldn't have been my first pick, I do think it is a good addition to the park, absolutely. I think most people always viewed Titan as their headliner because it was the tallest and fastest thing there. And even though it has an unconventional layout for a hypercoaster, it's still got the core moments of a big drop, airtime hill, bank turns. So going for an even bigger ride that's more inversion focused, I think is a nice compliment. Of course, the closest dive coaster to here is down south at Six Flags Fiesta Texas, Dr. Diabolical's Cliffhanger, which is about to be less than half the size of this thing. So a very different approach to the attraction. That being said, a lot of the dive coasters that I tend to prefer actually end up being some of the smaller ones, the more compact layouts, which, don't get me wrong, this ride might end up having the best of both worlds, because even though it is the tallest and the fastest, I wouldn't call it a sprawling experience. They still had a relatively confined space to work within, and so that might work for Tormenta's advantage. And with dive coasters becoming increasingly popular, this is actually the 3rd one in the Legacy Six Flags chain. I'm not surprised they went this direction, and I'm not surprised that they went with the Giga. Giga direction. If you've been following along, they've put out surveys at several of their properties, including Magic Mountain, Kings Island, Carowinds, saying, hey, what do you think of the idea of a Giga dive coaster? Clearly, it's been on their brain and they decide, hey, Six Flags Over Texas is the right spot for it. The question is, will this be the only Giga dive coaster they'll put in? In a way, I hope so. Not because this won't be a good ride, I'm sure it'll be fun. But a 300-foot dive coaster is such an interesting novelty, I kind of hope it remains the original. So that way, it's like, hey, if you want to experience something like that, you have to go to Six Flags Over Texas. If Magic Mountain ends up building one that's like 5 feet taller, then Tormenta suddenly loses its novelty. So overall, I think this is a really interesting attraction that we have debuting next year. We've never seen a dive coaster of this size before, and I hope that it delivers in the ride experience. I think for me personally, it will really just come down to on how it tracks. Some of the more recent dive coasters haven't been the smoothest, and with speeds this high and forces that strong, an intense shake or rattle could really affect rider comfort. You want this to be an attraction that people would be willing to wait hours for, would want to go again and again and again, and there's already some great rides at Six Flags Over Texas. I love New Texas Giant, Mr. Freeze, Shockwave. Those are probably my 3 favorites, which is ironic that the current largest roller coaster there is not in my top 3. A prime example of that bigger is not necessarily better, so I'm curious in seeing where Tormenta will fit in that lineup. It's going to be an exciting project to follow. Something we learned by October, that 300-foot lift hill will be complete, and the entire layout should be finished by the end of the year. And then, of course, in November at the IAAPA Expo in Orlando, we should be getting the train reveal. So plenty of milestones to keep us interested, all leading up to that eventual grand opening. I think it's going to become clear pretty early on that this attraction is meant to be a statement piece. And not just for Six Flags Over Texas, but for B&M too. This will be their 4th coaster over 300 feet. That's second only to Intamin. I think people are going to want to travel from all over to ride this thing, myself included. Mission accomplished, Six Flags. You have my attention. I can't wait to try out Tormenta, and let me know down in the comments below. If you're excited to experience this attraction, what you think of it as a fit for Six Flags Over Texas, and make sure to stay tuned for more here at Coaster Studios, and I'll see you next time.